Okay. I think we're just about
Yeah.
live. And okay, here we are. Looks like we're up on all the channels. Hello, my friend, and welcome to another episode of I Love Being Sober, sponsored by Camelback Recovery, Arizona's preferred sober living option to help AA newcomers stay sober during their first year in the program. If that's you or someone you know, then you're in the right place, because my name is Tim Westbrook, and I'm the CEO and founder of Camelback Recovery, here in the always sunny and always sober Scottsdale, Arizona, where my team and I, over the course of many years, have helped thousands of people to stop their suffering and continue on their path to recovery. Let's get clear on one thing. We believe that a relapse or a slip is not a part of recovery. And that's exactly why this podcast is dedicated to you or any loved one you know in their first year of striving to live a clean and sober life. The purpose of this podcast is to come clean with all of the misinformation that's out there about recovery, addiction treatment, mental illness, and the strategies to stay sober in general. So if you believe you're in the right place, or if you know someone who is struggling with addiction, then it's my privilege to share this podcast with you. Now, I have no idea if you and I have ever met, but what I do know is that AA saved my life. And I also know that to find long-term recovery and live happy, joyous, and free, it's not just about stopping your drinking, drugging, gambling, sexual indiscretions, or any other addiction you may have struggled with or suffered from. Because at Camelback Recovery, we believe that sobriety can and should be fun. And look, any recovery process is not easy. It is challenging. It can sometimes be annoying. And for the most of us, it is often difficult to stay on the path. But here's the good news. The self-awareness you gain from listening to this podcast, especially if you are in your first year of recovery, will help you make better choices, which will ultimately lead you to living a kick-ass sober life. Visit camelbackrecovery.com to learn more about our treatment strategies for alcoholism, drug addiction, or mental illness. And we even offer recovery coaching so that you can enjoy the freedom and happiness you've always searched for. The man I'm going to have a conversation with today is a 5-time Emmy Award winning former news anchor for CBS News based in Phoenix, Arizona. He's also a recovered meth addict and heroin addict since 2010. When he first got sober, his sponsor told him to go to the art store to pick up supplies and start creating. That's exactly what he did to keep his mind busy during the alone times. He says creating art saved his life, and it continues to be his main source of ongoing therapy and recovery. He has also received recognition in the art world for his abstract style painting. He was just nominated in 2021 for the Phoenix Art Museum's Emerging Artist Award. His podcast, Escaping Rock Bottom, focuses on mental health, and the podcast goes in depth on all things addiction by talking with addicts in recovery about their experience, strength, and hope. His podcast is currently being used as a daily workshop at more than 24 treatment centers across the country. Additionally, he is a best-selling author. His memoir, Mascara Boy, about child sex abuse and trauma, remains in the top 5 bestsellers on Amazon in the category of substance abuse. My guest today is Brandon Lee, and Relapse is part of his story.
Yep.
Today, we're going to talk about his relapse led him to finding his purpose in life. Brandon, welcome to the show. So glad to have you here.
Hey, what's up, Tim? It's good to be on your show. I usually have everybody on my show, Escaping Rock Bottom. So I always love when the tables are turned and other folks are kind of leading the conversation. But I'm super grateful. I always say that the more voices out there, the better. I'm so glad I'm not the only one doing a podcast on recovery. I think it's so important to have as many people speaking out loud about their experiences in recovery. So kudos to you for launching your podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just I'm so grateful to have you here. And to your point, the more people that talk about it, the more people we reach. And everybody has a different message that resonates with them. And so the goal of this conversation today is if we can put something out there that resonates with somebody and we can save one person's life or help one person find recovery, then
that's what it's all about.
Then that's what it's all about. Yep.
Yeah, and I love that listen, Tim, for 12 years, I went to 5 meetings a week in AA. So if you do the math, that's a lot of meetings.
Yeah, yeah.
And I do know what you said, and what you said about how this podcast for you is letting people know that relapse does not have to be part of their story. But, I'm always here to say that it may not have to be part of your story, but it also doesn't have to be the end of your story. I see about 60 people, 60 recovering addicts a day in my art studio as part of my art healing program. And Tim, 99.99% of the folks that I see daily in my art studio have experienced relapse. And I think that one of the reasons why I speak so much about relapse and the shame about relapse is to help people rid themselves of the shame or when they do relapse, because it is a high majority part of people's stories. Yes, it doesn't have to be part of your journey. Of course, it doesn't have to be, but it is a high majority part of people's stories. And I want people to understand that just because you relapse, it doesn't have to always be a negative experience. It can actually give birth to something really beautiful if you heal from it.
Absolutely. And I was at a meeting. I was at a conference in Palm Springs last week, and I went to one of the meetings there, and the topic was literally we talked about relapse. And I don't remember. I mean, there's not many meetings where they talk about relapse and how relapse is part of the story. I mean, one person was sober for 20 years, and then she relapsed. And as soon as she got clean, she came clean, because there's so much, to your point, there's so much guilt and shame, especially when someone they have some time. They have 6 months or a year or 5 years or 10 years or 13
or 11
years,
or 11 like me before I had my first relapse.
I mean, but the sooner you own it and come clean, the quicker you're going to be on the rebound, right?
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, my relapse lasted 7 hours, and I call it 7 hours of dark. In fact, I'm writing another book right now, Tim. It's called 7 Hours of Dark, How a Relapse Saved My Life. And what I'm trying to do is really flip the script on how society views relapse. I think oftentimes a normie out there looks at somebody who relapses and says, my God, why don't you have a strong enough will? Like, why are you so weak? Like, why can't you just not use? And I think it's really important to know that it's not about willpower. It is absolutely not about willpower when it comes to relapse at all. And for me, one of the things that, listen, I give thanks, and it's so important that people understand this. I give so much thanks for the foundation that AA had given me throughout my recovery journey. So please understand what I'm about to say. And this is no disrespect at all, because I actually think the traditions of the AA program and the principles really of it, everybody in society could benefit if they do the 12 steps, right? You shouldn't just have to be sober or in addiction and recovery in order to do that. I think everyone would benefit from those things. Here's where I differ. I don't believe you lose the time that you've gained when you relapse. And I don't believe you start over at 24 hours. Because I think that actually prevents a lot of people from continuing their journey within AA and recovery. I think that when they relapse, because listen, at 11 years when I relapsed, the thought, Tim, of going back to 24 hours was too daunting for me to start over. And I couldn't start over at 24 hours because 24 hours takes me back to when I was in a coma on life support at Hollywood Presbyterian Hospital. And I relapsed for 7 hours. So are you trying to tell me that those 7 hours wiped away the 11 and a half years that I had gained in recovery? Absolutely not. I never lose that experience, strength, and hope. What I did was I focused on, what do I need to heal from? I was only out for 7 hours on my meth relapse, which is not a long time at all. And nor did I feel it necessary for me to show up to a room in front of a bunch of random people to announce that I've relapsed. Taking accountability is me sharing that with my shaman and sharing it with my therapist that I had relapsed, and I needed to do more inner work because I wasn't ready to tell the world, especially as a public figure, that I had relapsed. And so I did take accountability with my therapist and my shaman, and I began to do inner child work that I had never done, because at that time, Tim, I had only gone to meetings. I hadn't done trauma therapy. I hadn't done shamanism. I'd never done inner child work. And so when I say that relapse saved my life and gave birth to my new life, I mean that, because without that relapse, my shaman asked me this question: Brandon, do you love the life you have today? And I tell Toby, my shaman, Toby, I love the life I have today. If I count time a year and a half after a relapse, I'm happier today than I was at year 11. I'm happier today than I was at year 10. So looking at that, why would I regret the relapse that I had? I began to do that inner child work that has given birth to a new Brandon. And that's only happened because I experienced that relapse. That relapse only told me to say, hey, Brandon, you have a lot more healing work to do.
Right, right. Yeah, and I agree with you on, if someone relapses, they have 11 years. You had 11 years, you relapsed for 7 hours.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that that's one of the issues I have. I love AA. AA saved my life. And,
me too.
And I believe, like you believe, that, I mean, there's lots of people that say everybody should be involved in some sort of 12-step program. Everybody should work the steps. It's the easy. Being an alcoholic and a drug addict, it really is like, I feel lucky. I feel lucky that I had to go and do the steps. And I had a sponsor that took me through the steps. And I connected with a bunch of other like-minded people that wanted to be clean and sober, that wanted to do the deal. But I know you've also experienced this. There's a lot of people that just because they're going to meetings doesn't necessarily mean they're doing the work.
So can I tell you this? So I share this with people who come into my art studio all the time, because I don't believe, and I'm a true believer, trauma is generational. And so are the awful sayings that our parents' generation taught us, like time heals all wounds. No, it doesn't. It just suppresses the energy down further into you. Time doesn't heal anything. And from what I've learned is that if I'm happier a year and a half after a relapse than I was at year 10, then time in recovery doesn't equal happiness. And that's something that I've had to walk through and live through with lived experience, because Tim, as you know, as I'm sure many of the meetings you've gone to, have you ever been to a meeting where somebody's collecting 35 years and they get, they stand up there, they have their 35-year medallion, right? And sometimes the saltiest, the crankiest, and the crustiest people in a meeting are those with 35 plus years. Why? Because granted, they've never picked up a drink or used. Congratulations to you. But how many wives have they had? How many times have they cheated on somebody? And are they showing up for their kids, right? And are they doing well for others? And just because you have a length of time in recovery does not make you a healed soul, okay? It does not make you nice. As a matter of fact, one of the things that I used to hate was this saying where I'd hear these old timers say, hey, sit down and shut up to the newcomer. And I'm like, my goodness, that's the last thing you should ever say to a newcomer. Let them share. Let them get that energy out, because if that's what's going to prevent them from drinking or using, let them use that space to do that. Don't tell anybody to sit down and shut up for the first year. And so I tell them, you sit down and shut up. Like, don't ever be like that. Don't be mean to those people coming in. And so time doesn't equal happiness is what I want people to understand. And I don't want people to sit there and think that you have to wait a year to celebrate your recovery. Because I don't count time anymore, Tim. I don't collect chips. I gave all my chips back. I don't count time. It's not important to me anymore. And so what I tell people, I said, listen, you shouldn't have to wait for a birthday to celebrate your recovery. My God, celebrate it after 5.5 months. Celebrate each day. You don't have to wait for a year. Because what I experienced was, as soon as I hit 1 year, okay, the day after I collected that chip, that afternoon, I experienced this crash, this almost emotional crash. Like, God, I have to wait another year to celebrate me. And so when I hit 2 years, it wasn't good enough. And I was like, no, when I hit 3, then I'll be happy. Well, guess what? When I hit 3, I said, no, as soon as I hit year 5 is a solid number, then I'll be happy. And what I wasn't doing was just enjoying the moment and enjoying the present and enjoying the now. And so that's why I encourage people. It doesn't take a long time to achieve happiness. So that's just the one thing I kind of push back about the whole, the word continuous in recovery, because I just don't want people to not come back because they feel like they have to start over at 24 hours, because you don't.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. Yeah. Okay, so let's go back. I want to kind of dig into your story a little bit. So if you don't mind, tell me a little bit about your upbringing.
Yeah, for sure. So I grew up I share my story all the time, and I think it's really important to point out that I did grow up probably the most privileged little white kid in Orange County, California. I grew up on the beaches like Laguna Beach, Corona del Mar, Newport Beach, the Wedge, if you're familiar with Southern California.
I broke my leg at the Wedge.
Yeah. I mean, listen, I woke up every morning out of my bedroom window, and it was the view of the Wedge. So it's super privileged. I never had to worry about a roof over my head. I never had to worry about food on the table. And my family did send me to the best private Catholic schools around. If any of your followers are NFL football fans, Carson Palmer the former quarterback for the Arizona Cardinals, was one of my best friends in high school at Santa Margarita Catholic High School. I played soccer. I played international soccer. I had a chance to go to Europe when I was a teenager and play. So from the outside looking in, I had a perfect life. But at age 15, I began abusing cocaine and became a sex addict and became actually a sex worker. And what people don't know is that all that privilege that I grew up around did not prevent me from being repeatedly molested as a child by my next door neighbor, my youth soccer coach, and also my piano teacher every Friday, who had unfettered access to me. All in addition to that, was also physically and mentally abused, unfortunately, by a mother who I know her intent was to never harm me, but unfortunately she passed down trauma to me. And so at age 15, I began to act out. So even though I was growing up with all this privilege, all that child abuse had a huge impact on the development of my brain. And so at age 15, I became a drug addict. I became very good at going into survival mode, because survival mode for me, in order to survive, was to put a smile on my face and do really good in school, overachieve academically and athletically. And so at the age of 21, I got into NYU. And so I was in New York University, and unfortunately was there on 9/11. I was actually on the subway and was trapped underground on 9/11 on my way to work. And I leave people with this. I don't need to go into detail, but I saw things that day that, Tim, no human should ever see. I'll leave it at that. And I didn't even count that to be a traumatic life experience. I just suppressed that even further. It's also when my recreational drug use began to skyrocket all the way to the very end.
So yeah, go ahead. You started experimenting at 15, right?
At 15 with cocaine, yeah.
At 15. And when did you 15, and you said it started to escalate at 21?
Yeah, really started to take off at age
20. Did you ever think you might have a problem in between 15 and 21, or did you just think you were recreational? I'm doing the things that my friends are doing.
And that's it, right? We surround ourselves with people who are doing the exact same thing. So that mirror reflection doesn't look any different, right? So that's why you think what you're doing is normal. It's not recreational partying. It's what everybody else is doing, what I'm doing. So what I'm doing is okay. That kind of mentality. And so, at the very end, I was an anchor in Los Angeles, California, for a station, KTLA 5. And I used to get off the air at 10:35 at night. And by 10:40, I was doing GHB in the parking lot and doing meth. And, like many people who are in recovery have overdosed at some point in their life or have experienced that. I did too. I was in the slums of Los Angeles. I was in a back alley getting high on meth. Here I was a news anchor an hour earlier, and then I was in the slums of Los Angeles. And my overdose, I ended up cracking my head open, collapsing and cracking my head open. I ended up at Hollywood Presbyterian Hospital in a coma on life support for about a week's time. And when I came out of that coma, Tim, the chief neurosurgeon sat there at the end of my hospital bed, and he looked at me and goes, "Brandon, you've been out for about a week, and unfortunately, you have a lot of bleeding in your brain right now. And if we don't cauterize those veins and do brain surgery, you're likely going to die in the next 48 hours." And I looked at him, and I was not done. I literally unhooked myself from life support, and I walked right out of the hospital wearing a hospital robe and hospital socks. I walked right down Hollywood Boulevard, and I found my truck, Tim. And the last thing I consciously remember, as if it was yesterday, I got into the truck and, like a zombie, opened up the center console, got out my my meth pipe, and I got high in my truck again. And that's the last thing I remember. I don't know who found me. I don't know who called 911. But I ended up in a coma on life support again in the same hospital with the same team of doctors around me who had saved my life twice in 2 weeks. And was really the first time I was shown compassion. This beautiful Black nurse, maybe 5'0", came to my bedside. She held my hand and she said, "Brandon, do you believe in God?" And I looked at her and I said, "No, I don't." And she goes, "That's okay. My God still believes in you. I've saved your life twice in 2 weeks. So I'm going to give you $10 in cash out of my own purse. And I want you to go to my church on Melrose and Mansfield. When they release you, they have an AA meeting there, and I want you to go to it." And I made her that promise. And Tim, when I was released, I went to that AA meeting, and I was sober ever since that day of 11 and a half years before I relapsed.
Wow. So you were, so 21, at 21 years old, it was when your drinking and drug use escalated, and then you ended up in LA. How long after that were you in LA and overdosing?
Yeah, I would say that period of overdosing was probably a period of a year. I was 20. Gosh, was 28, 29 years old when I got sober.
So 21 to 28, 29 was
hardcore.
Just a blur, right? Just
super high functioning blur. Yeah, super high functioning blur. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I can. And you talk about GHB, which GHB is also part of my story. I mean, I can't tell you.
It's all sex fueled for me. So, you know, that's what I always tell people. Like, I was never a project tweaker. I knew project tweakers, like they would like crochet or clean their house. I'm like, why would you do meth and do that? That sounds very boring. So mine was always sex driven, but it's no wonder, right? Being early sexually exploited as a child, that my drugs was so tied to sex.
Right. Okay. So you got clean and sober, and then you were clean and sober for 11 years, 11 and a half years, you say? Okay. And then what happened?
Yeah, for sure. So 2020 was really difficult, right? 2020, the pandemic hit. We always say in recovery, the opposite of addiction is connection. And so the isolation really fucked with everybody. Excuse my language. It really messed with everybody. And addicts or non-addicts, it just messed with our wiring because the pandemic was a traumatic life experience. In addition to that, being a news anchor was not easy at the time. To be quite honest with you, everything became political, and I just became an easy target for a lot of hate when it became the masks and the virus, right? People just came at me all the time. And George Floyd was murdered on my 40th birthday, and I had to cover a lot of those rallies and the protests. It was not easy. And then the election was that year, and well, you know how that went. And here's the thing. I really don't give a shit like who's a Republican, who's a Democrat, who you voted for. Like, I truly don't give a damn. But I ended up getting a lot of extortion attempts made against me, and it was enough, Tim, to send me into fight or flight, to where the authorities got involved. And I began violently shaking every single night, violently shaking. I had 2 weighted blankets that weighed 100 pounds to weigh me down at night, and it didn't work. And one night I couldn't take it anymore, Tim. I just, the violent shaking was so intense that I went into fight or flight mode. And in flight mode for me was relapsing, and I got high for those 7 hours, and it calmed me down. But then when I came out of it, the shame of that relapse was so intense, Tim, that I didn't even want to tell my therapist about it. And so in January of 2021, I got a gun, and I sat there at the edge of my bed and played Russian roulette for 2 weeks because of the shame of the relapse. I was afraid that I was going to lose my job. Like, how could I tell CBS that I just relapsed on meth? Like, who's gonna have a news anchor who's a meth addict? Like, they would never accept that. And how would the public view me? A year prior to that, I wrote a book called Mascara Boy, and it was a best-selling book about recovery. And that was a year prior. Like, who was I? And so I thought I had lost my whole life. And so that's how dark it got for me. But that's, again, when I started doing inner child work and shamanism, which really helped me heal from my childhood experiences. And that's why, Tim, I speak so openly about my relapse now, is because I can't be the only one who suffers that weight of shame after a relapse. And I never want people ever to contemplate taking their life because they think they have to start over. And just the thought of starting over is daunting. And that's why I don't count time anymore. And that's why I tell people also, like, for those who really take a lot of pride in their chips and counting time, you do you. I'm not trying to take that away from you. But I tell a lot of people, I see a lot of broken people every day, and I look at them, I'm like, stop counting time. Stop counting time. Okay. Heal yourself, because happiness does not equate with time. And so I just never want somebody going that dark. So that's what happened, Tim. It was unhealed trauma. Basically, I started violently shaking because I had never healed from my trauma. In the 11 years, all I did was go to meetings. Okay. I didn't do any inner child work. I never went to treatment. I never did EMDR to get me past the frontal lobe to the lower part of my brain, where we store those traumatic memories. More importantly, we store that energy in the lower part of our spines. The body keeps the score. It's a great book. Everyone should read it. It's because our bodies remember that trauma. And until we go back and do the inner child work, we will continue to relapse. It's why I tell everybody, if you're a constant retread and you continue to relapse, have you done inner child work? Have you gone back to heal yourself from the trauma? Because trauma, in my opinion, is the gateway. Unhealed trauma is the reason why we use. Okay. And so until we heal from that trauma, we will likely be triggered again down the road. Meetings are not the only thing. It's why I look at recovery as a pie chart. Meetings are a sliver of the pie. They're not the whole pie, right? EMDR, trauma therapy, life coaching, things that you offer at Camelback Recovery are part of a whole pie chart. It's not just one modality that heals all.
It's all. There's lots of people that think that trauma is the root of all addiction. That's what Gabor Mate thinks, that trauma.
I'm a huge believer of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the body does keep the score.
And I tell people all the time, until you heal from the cuts that have made you bleed, you will bleed on others who never hurt you. And I know that my mother's intent was to never hurt me nor harm me. She did the best she could. She suffered a lot of abuse as a child. And unfortunately, she passed down that trauma to me. And my shaman asked me this, Brandon, you love the life you have today? And I tell him all the time, Toby, I love the life I have today. He says, good. Then you need to give thanks to the mother who abused you, because Brandon, without her, you would not have this life you had today. Yeah. And he says, Brandon, you love the life you had today. Toby, I love this life I had today. He goes, good, then you need to give thanks to that relapse you experienced, not suffered, experienced in 2020. Because Brandon, without that, you would not have this life you have today.
I love that. Life happens for me, not to me. Relapse happens for me, not to me. It doesn't have to be part of the story, but to your point, it's part of the story for
a lot of people.
Most people.
A high majority.
Yeah, yeah. And I like you're pointing out that 12-step recovery is just a little sliver.
It is
in the grand scheme of things. It's, you have detox, you have treatment, you have EMDR, you have,
IOP, PHP. Congratulations, by the way. You guys just launched an IOP program, I believe, June 1st.
Yes, we did. And we're in the Biltmore, and yeah, we have, that's another level of care. And
it is. And it's so important people understand that, because I have to tell people, and I'll preach it to the end of my time here on earth, is that we have to look at recovery as a full pie chart. And there are pieces of a pie that make a whole person. So if you're somebody out there who's just going to meetings and you're miserable and you're struggling and you're white knuckling, you need to add another piece of the pie to your recovery, because recovery to me is showing up and doing good for others. Recovery to me is being a good father, being a good husband, being a good human. That is what recovery is. And we can only do that when we are healed, because we all know this, right? Yeah. Hurt people hurt people.
Yep.
Well, healed people heal people. Love and that. I tell people this all the time. Those who have suffered a lot of trauma in their life, especially early on in their life, like I did, and we heal from our trauma, have the ability to become the world's best healers and help others through their darkness.
Hurt people. And I think it's, as you're talking, I'm thinking about, as an addict in the disease, we lie, cheat, steal, because we want fulfillment. That's really all it is. We want the nice car, the big house, the hot girl, the hot guy, the whatever. We want all of these things because we're chasing fulfillment.
And we're chasing something to numb what's really hurting us.
Right. And then once we get to the root of that trauma, then we're free to go out and help another person, which really, that's how we get to fulfillment, is by being of service, helping another person, sharing what was given to us.
Yes, because it's so important. And I think you would agree to this, is that, spirituality has to play a role in someone's recovery. Like, I just don't care. Spirituality has to play a role. And what has been taught to me is that God does not call the qualified. God qualifies the called. And I think it's really important that people understand that, especially with people with trauma and a history, to not look at the trauma that you have suffered as a negative. Look at it as an opportunity to heal yourself from that trauma through that lived experience, that you will be able to go help others. Because, Tim, if 99.9% of the people who come to Art of Our Soul have experienced relapse, if I have never experienced a relapse, how can I help them? How can I honestly say, I get you and I understand the shame you are feeling? I truly believe, as part of my journey, my higher power had me experience, not suffer, experience a relapse so that I can do the healing work that I need to do in my studio every day to help those who have experienced relapse. We all have a different journey on this world. We all have a different path, and we're all here to help different groups of people. That's what we're here to do through that experience. So I believe I went through that experience for my soul's purpose, to live its purpose on life, to help those folks.
Why are you so passionate about carrying the message and helping other people?
I can only say this, that I have had such clear, vivid dreams. Listen, if I heard myself, if my version of myself 5 years ago heard these words coming out of my mouth, I would be like, you need to certify this dude and like send him to a fucking clinic.
Yeah.
I will say this, I have had very vivid dreams to where I had heard my higher speak to me and tell me what my life's purpose is. To the point, Tim, that I walked away from a career of 22 years on September 28th of last fall, in the middle of a major contract with CBS and Arizona Span. That I walked away from that newsroom on September 28th, mid-contract, to live this life.
Wow.
Because I knew that this was my life's purpose. And I didn't expect them to understand, although they did.
Right.
And I didn't expect a lot of other people to, because there are still some people that are like, I can't believe you walked away from the job you did at the age of 41. And I'm like, I know. Yeah. But if you heard the dreams and you had the dreams that I did, they were so vivid. I know that this is what I was called to do.
That's awesome. And so tell me what it is that you're doing now.
Yeah. So last summer I have the dream. It's actually written on a paper towel when you walk into my art studio. Like when I tell people I dreamt it. I really did. I woke up, actually, I didn't even remember writing this, but I woke up to 3 words that were sitting on my nightstand. It said studio, gallery, and school. And those 3 words meant nothing to me. And I helped manifest that through my shaman. And 2 days later, on July 10th of last summer, not even a year ago, I heard a voice in my head. And yes, it was clear as day. And it basically told me I needed to leave news, open up an art healing program for trauma survivors like me, to give them the gift of art in the way art has helped me heal from my trauma. Now go build it, my shaman said. Yeah. Well, on November 1st, I opened the doors to Art of Our Soul. It's an art healing program for all trauma survivors. And basically, I teach acrylic pouring. It's what's so important is that when we are in recovery, and whether we've faced any kind of trauma, it actually makes the creative side of our brain go dormant. Right. And so what I'm here to do is to unlock that side of the brain, get that dopamine to flow. If I can get people to experience joy again, when they go back to treatment, they're more engaged in therapy. They're more engaged in group, and they're just happier. And it's really important to unlock that dopamine early on in recovery, for them to give that person hope that they can smile and laugh again. And we do that through art, getting them into an alpha state and a state of healing. I see it every day. I get goosebumps. I see it every day in my art studio happening. And I've been open 7 months now. And I've gotten all the feedback from all the CEOs and the clinical directors. And they're like, Brandon, whatever it is you're doing, keep doing it. Because they come back from the shuttle and they're laughing, they're smiling, they're dancing. And so, again, it's my pie of the chart, right? I can't heal everybody. I can't heal a whole person, but I can play a role and have that sliver of my pie of art healing, so that EMDR, group therapy, 12-step, IOP, and PHP works a little bit better for them.
Yeah, they all complement each other.
They all do.
They all complement each other. Yeah, that's beautiful. And I would imagine that some people are going to are going to be feel a bigger impact from the art therapy. And then you also have like, and some people kind of make fun of, oh yeah, they go surfing as part of their therapy. It's like, well, yeah, surfing, hiking, like whatever it is.
It's a state of oneness where you're essentially elevated to an alpha state. I tell people all the time, have you ever done something, usually with your hands, or an activity where you lose all sense of time, right? Like the time just flies. You're like, where did those hours go? Well, you don't understand scientifically, we live in a state of beta. Like right now, I'm shooting a podcast with Tim, over at Camelback Recovery. And then I got another art session in an hour from now. And then I got another meeting, right? All that's beta. But when all of a sudden we lose sense of time, what's happened is our body's been elevated to an alpha state. It's a state of healing. It's a state where it lowers anxiety. It helps with depression. And so that's what going on a hike, surfing does for people,
Yeah.
pottery. I'm eventually going to be adding pottery classes to my Art of Our Soul, and acrylic pouring, anything you do with your hands. So you lose sense of time. Right. And that's where we can help those people where they suffer those, whether it's PTSD, anxiety, and depression.
And I think that's similar to being in a flow state, right?
It is. That's exactly right.
That's a flow
Being
in the
in
flow.
the flow. Correct. And like, you know what, my shaman actually told me when I first started, he goes, Brandon, how many treatment centers have committed to your program? This was back in November, and I
Yeah.
had three. I had
Yeah.
three.
Yeah.
And he goes, I need you to stop reaching out to treatment centers. And I was like, yo, Toby, I'm all down with the spiritual gangster stuff, but like, I'm trying to run a
I
business,
need
and
to
like
make some money over
I need to
here.
make sure. I was like, that's not really the best business advice. And he goes, Brandon, I'm going to tell you something. He goes, when you're in the line of healing and
Yeah.
healing work, those who need you will find you. You don't need to find them.
Yeah.
And sure enough, I hit 15 treatment centers. So it's like, in 7 months. And it just, when you're doing good and you're in the flow, as you say, it's what my trauma therapist says. You're in the flow.
In the
You are
flow.
in a state of, you are in the flow, and you just know it. Like nothing is forced. It just happens. And I don't know how any way else to describe it other than like right now, I'm in the flow. It just all
Yeah.
flows.
Yeah. Yeah. It's beautiful. It's
But it
like
takes work. It takes work.
you got you have to, it's like you have to, well, they say, flow follows focus. Okay. And so, and there's a guy named Stephen Kotler that wrote a book, The Art of the Impossible. And that's the first time I'd heard that. And it's like, okay. And you think about it when you're in a yoga class, the whole point of a yoga class is the shavasana at the end. And I don't know about you, but that's normally when the thoughts come to me. If I'm on a bike ride, if I go, I love to cycle, and I go on these rides and I work really hard, and then I swear all of my best ideas come to me during the last 20 minutes of the bike ride when I'm just cruising home. It's like, light bulbs.
You want to know why? Because what you've done is you've freed the blockages in your brain to allow that to flow, right? I call like depression, anxiety, fear, trauma, all that are just blockers to get us to where we really need to go. And when you're doing those activities, what you're doing is you're reducing those blockers. And then towards the end, you'll notice is when all those ideas are flowing because you've removed the blockers and now it's allowing that creativity to flow.
Yeah, and it can't be something where you're like focused, meaning something that's kind of hard. Like you have to really focus on it, and that's when the blocks come down.
Correct. I mean, and it takes work, and I don't want people to think that like, oh, Brandon's life is so easy. I'm like, I do a lot of work. Like my shaman sessions are my inner child work are like 2.5-hour sessions, and it's constant. This isn't like a one and done thing. Like it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to maintain it.
Well, you have to do the work. You hear a lot of people, they say, you got to do the work. You got to do that. Well, what does that mean? And how do you go and do the work? Because some people, they just don't even know what to do.
Right.
Like how did you realize you needed to do inner child work? What was
my relapse? I mean, that's what it was. That was my awakening moment. My relapse. I was like, well, God, what I've been doing up until this time clearly didn't prevent me from a relapse. Right. That's why I'm saying, like, I had 11.5 years in my bank, and that didn't stop me from relapsing in 2020. So, I was like, well, I need to do something else. And that's when I told my trauma therapist, because I did do trauma therapy at that time. And she goes, you're ready for Toby. You need to do inner child work with the shaman. And so that's when I began doing that. It's similar to EMDR. I just do it through deep breath work. In about 8 minutes, 10 minutes of deep breath work, I'm able to drop back and I actually see my life in a film strip, and I'm able to see childhood memories or traumatic life events. And I'm actually able to go there through a healthy, healed Brandon with the guidance of a shaman and a trained person, and actually heal myself from those so that it's not a lobotomy. You don't forget about it, but you can actually heal yourself from those moments so that you're no longer triggered into fight or flight mode, right? So I can recognize and acknowledge what happened, but I can tell my inner child, you don't have to run anymore. I'm here. I've got you now. Okay. I'm going to take you out of this situation. Believe it or not, man, it works. It works tremendously. It is a lot of work. And I am privileged enough that I can afford a shaman. What my hope is that insurance companies will understand it is better for their investment to allow all of these new modalities to help people, and they should pay for them. Because if they don't, they're going to continue to pay for people every time they relapse just to go and do the same old tired thing that they've done over and over and over again. And so I'm a huge push with insurance companies. Every time I have a CEO of a health plan in front of me, I encourage them to include shamanism and deep breath work into their modalities.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think they're part of their decision-making process. I mean, they have to figure, I can't even imagine being the person that makes those decisions on what insurance companies pay for. What
it's a more upfront investment, right? You're going to pay more. Insurance companies would likely pay more upfront, but if you can stop people from relapsing, aren't you saving more in the long run?
Yeah,
you got to play the different game.
The issue, or the main thing, is that there has to be data to support the efficacy of shamanism or whatever it is.
Right.
And
they're finally starting to, they finally started to do EMDR, right? But there was a time where insurance companies weren't paying for EMDR.
Right. Right. And I think there's a lot to it. There's a lot to it. Okay. So let's talk about your podcast, Escaping Rock Bottom.
Yeah, my podcast, Escaping Rock Bottom, it's really simply put, it's just a lot of people coming on, sharing their experience, strength, and hope, just their journey, because I think it's really important that, what gave birth to it actually was I was writing a book, and 6 months prior to it, I was actually just starting a podcast to build a base for my book for it to launch. And then it took off in these crazy ways. But, we really just focus on people's stories, their experience, strength, and hope, because what I have found is that a majority of people listen to podcasts in the morning, right? When they're on their morning jog, they're on their morning walk, or on their commute to work. And so what I figured, what it's now become is people listen to my podcast on their way to work. I've got 3 seasons, probably over 120 episodes, and at least, and so people can listen to them on their drive. So if you can't make a meeting, it's like going to a meeting. You're hearing somebody qualify and share their experience, strength, and hope. And it's really just a free flowing conversation. The cool thing is that it's now being used at treatment centers around the country as part of just a workshop. So they'll listen to a podcast episode, and then they'll do a group breakout discussion with it. And I think it's really important. I think it's just another voice out there talking about, because as you said, right, we all come, even in recovery, we come from a different experience. You've never experienced a relapse. Well, I have. So I can give voice to those who have experienced that, right? And so I think it's important, the more voices we have out there, the more connection we can make with other people to make them feel like they're not alone. Right. And I think that that's the most important thing, because us addicts, we love to go into woe is me, right? This is only happening to me. And why am I so unique? When the fact is, I'm not unique. And there's a lot of other people that have had the same thoughts, the same ideations that I have had. And by giving voice to it, which is why, if I can say this, and again, not an insult to AA at all.
Yeah.
Okay. But anonymity is rooted in shame. Okay. Anonymity is rooted in shame. If shame wasn't a factor, why would we need to be anonymous? Why?
Right.
Why? We wouldn't have to be. The reason why it's anonymous is because if we did share it with our employer, we feared, right? We feared that we would be fired. We feared that people would judge us. We feared we would lose all these things, right? But that's all based out of shame. Right. So if we remove all of that, and the more of us that speak out and openly, and we give a face and a voice to what addiction and behavioral health looks like, we're going to realize it looks like Emmy Award winning news anchors, right? It looks like lawyers, and it looks like doctors. It's not just a person living under the 7th Street Bridge. So that's why I tell everybody should say and be proud to say, I suffer behavioral health. I'm in recovery. And this was my story. Because what they're doing is actually helping that person who needs help to come out.
Right. Yeah. And when I think of Alcoholics Anonymous, and it's anonymous, and it really, what I think of is the fact that it's up to each individual person whether or not they want to share their story. And hey, if somebody doesn't want to share their story, then they get to make that choice.
But usually, if you ask them the next question, it's why. Yeah. Why don't you want to share your story? Why? Because they're ashamed.
It's shame. Yeah. There's
because
shame.
They're ashamed. They're
afraid of being judged, and they're afraid they're not going to get the next job. They're afraid of what people are going to think of them. There are negative connotations associated with being an alcoholic or a drug addict.
And so my life, and I hope that people with you and your podcast, that CEOs and people who do run their own companies, they look at people like you and me, Tim, and they're like, well, why wouldn't I want to hire a Brandon Lee?
Right.
Even with his story and his background. Why wouldn't I want to hire them? Why wouldn't I want to work or partner with Tim? These are great guys doing great things in their lives. And you know what? They're living recovery out loud. And I had a relapse in 2020, and I should still be considered for a job if I didn't own my own company, right? I want people to understand and see that I am a face of behavioral health, right?
Yeah.
And so I hope by us living the lives that we're living makes it a little easier for the person out there to say, I can have what they have too. And I can recover out loud without living with shame because trauma was passed down to me. I didn't choose to be molested as a child. I didn't choose to be abused as a child. But that abuse changed the way my brain was formed because it happened at such a young age. And that sent me off the rails. Why should I be punished? And why should I be shamed publicly for the rest of my life? It wasn't my choice.
Right. I was connected with someone by my cousin. He was an investor, and he had some guys up in I think it's in Kansas. They were gonna invest some money into this detox facility, behavioral health, and I happen to know the guys, just because we're both in the treatment world. And he was asking me questions, and I'm sitting over here going, this guy's an investor. He's not in recovery, but I'm sitting here going, man, I would way rather invest my money that's actively working a program of recovery. And that's the thing about people that are in recovery. I know that they've done the work. I know these guys. I know they've done the work.
Yeah,
I know
correct.
that they're good guys. I know that they're living a life of honesty. I know that they're doing the next right thing and they just want to help people. I would way rather go into business with somebody that has done the work, someone that's on the path, someone that's in recovery, because I know I know a lot about them just by the fact that they're in recovery.
Yes. Tim, you're preaching to the choir. I am with you 100% because you know what? At our worst, we're liars, cheats, thieves, and master manipulators.
Yeah.
But when we're working in recovery, we can honestly be the hardest working, the most truthful and honest and upfront people. And that's kind of people on one of my team. On the same foot, it's important for people in recovery because when you have clients that are coming to Camelback Recovery, right, to get clean and sober and find a new journey in their life, they need to be able. It is why insurance allows peer support to be built, right? Because we have the ability, Tim, to break through to another addict faster than a trained therapist can without that lived experience of recovery, right?
Mm-hmm.
And addiction.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
we just can't, because we immediately can break through that barrier because they're like, oh yeah, this dude knows the shit he's talking about. He used to be me, right? And so I think that, and that's the beautiful thing about working in the behavioral health field.
Yeah. So, Brandon, is there a question? And this has been a great conversation. I've gotten so much out of it. Thank you for your time. I know how busy you are, and I know you've got lots. This podcast is in between your art sessions, which Camelback Recovery, we're going to be bringing our IOP.
Yeah, so you guys are the last. You're the last group. You are the 15th, and everybody else is on a wait list. So I'm very humbled and grateful for the partnership. Yeah.
No, it's awesome. And so, is there a question that you wanted me to ask you today that I did not ask?
No, you've done a great job, honestly, asking me a lot of questions. And I'm trying to think. No, because I'm really grateful that you asked me about how Relapse has kind of saved my soul, and really kind of flipping the script on that. So I'm really grateful for that opportunity to speak on that. And no, I leave people with this, that, and I think it's important for people to understand this, is that not all storms are coming to destroy your life. Sometimes that storm is coming to clear your path. You will notice that when a tornado strikes, one neighborhood will be totally fine. The street over will be utterly destroyed. Take the word storm out and put relapse in. Not every relapse is coming to destroy your life. Sometimes it is happening to clear your path. Use that experience as a way for yourself to grow. We learn from our mistakes. I didn't come up with that saying. That is life saying. We learn from our mistakes. Perfectionism doesn't always exist. All right. So stop trying to be perfect. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be. And not everything that happens to you has to be a negative thing. It could be a negative experience at the time and it hurts and it cuts. but it can also be a time to grow and use that as an opportunity to heal.
Love it. Love it. There's one other thing that I was just thinking about is I've seen so many people that have had 5 years or 8 years or 10 years or 11 years or 17 years of sobriety. And those are the people, in my experience, they have the hardest time getting sober again.
Yeah, I'll tell you what. Yeah, because they don't want to start over from day one.
They don't want to start because there's too much guilt and shame. Or even if they do start over from day one, it's almost like they just like there's something different. And thankfully you figured out like, hey, there's something different because I already had over 11 years. I've got to do something different than I was doing before. Just going to AA meetings and working with my sponsor and sponsoring guys, like that's
not enough.
That wasn't enough. There was something, you had to do something different. If you continue to do what you've always done, you'll continue to get what you always got.
Yeah, it's the definition of craziness.
Definition of insanity is doing the same thing, expecting different results. Yeah.
Right. And so what I will say too is that are you inferring to the fact when, somebody with a lot of time relapses for the first time and then they continue to relapse, like they continue to struggle. And here's what I will say is because they haven't healed from their trauma. So they're going back and they're doing the same things that they did before. You had the ability to white knuckle. Like I'm a pretty strong-willed person.
Yeah.
All right. I'm a pretty strong-willed dude. Yeah. And the trauma that I suffered as a child and experienced as a child, people are like, how did you do 11 years without any trauma therapy, without any EMDR, without any shamanism? Like, you just did meetings and that was my willpower. Well, guess what? My white knuckles couldn't hold on anymore. And so that was the end of that.
11 years of white knuckling.
It's a long time. And so what I tell people is that I will say this is that they're continuing to do that same thing of thinking that, well, if I did 11 years of just meetings, I can do another 11 years of just meetings. And the fact of the matter is that is not true. Your white knuckles are not able to grip as tight anymore. You have to give new muscles in order to hold on to your recovery. And that is by healing your trauma. So every time I see people in here with 5 or 6 relapses, I always tell them, have you done inner child work? And the answer is no, almost 100% of the time. And so I encourage people who are listening right now, if you don't know what inner child work is, Google it, research it, and find somebody who can help you do that.
Awesome. What advice do you have for newcomers?
Oh boy. As my sponsor in recovery first told me when I was first getting sober, that alone time would be my most dangerous time. It's when the wheels spin. And what I want them to know is that you need to find a hobby. You need to find something with your hands. You need to find something to kill that alone time that'll make the anxiety, make the depression go away. And I did it through art. Art is a huge thing that I do in my alone time when I get anxious or depressed or sad. It really levels me out. But here's really what I want to tell them is that it does not have to take a year for you to experience joy. Get that out of your head. You don't have to wait for your birthday to experience joy and to pat yourself on the back. You can experience joy weeks after you get sober, months after you get sober. Definitely do the work, but please, for the love of God, don't just think going to meetings is going to be what heals you. It is a part of your foundation. Doing the 12 steps is a part of the foundation of your recovery, but it is not all of it. And be open to new ideas. Be open to EMDR. Be open to shamanism. Do everything you can. Try every modality. Not every modality will work for you, but you will eventually find another modality that does. And remember that recovery is a pie chart. It is not just one sliver of a pie.
I love that. And that's one of the things that I always say. It's people need to get new hobbies, new interests, new friends, new eating habits, new sleeping habits, new exercise. For sure. They pray, they meditate, like all of these things, and new hobbies, new interests, new friends, all of those things need to happen. And that's part of learning how to live life differently, because that's it. They have to learn how to live life differently. And such an important piece of learning to live life differently is developing new hobbies and new interests, because I don't know about you, but for me, pretty much everything about what I did my entire life was, involved drinking or doing drugs. That was always part of the equation. So and that's how it is for most people. So when they get clean and sober, like, okay, what am I going to do now?
Well, the body responds to that because sex, again, meth and sex, that was always tied to me, meth and G and sex. So when I got sober, everything, it's called neuroplasticity, right? It's the malleability of the brain. So neuroplasticity can either work for us, but it can also work against us. So if you have porn addiction, right, you'll never be able to have healthy sex because you're telling yourself, I have to watch porn in order to get off. But if for so many years that you were a sex addict and you tied your drugs, it's like this. Well, guess what? When you take the drugs away, the sex is still here, but it doesn't know how to operate, right? You have to retrain and rewire your brain into what healthy sex is, because we can't quit sex. Right. Sex is very healthy for a normal person. Right. So when things are tied like this, and this is what we know, we take the drugs away and this thing's like, well, how do I function? So you have to rewire the brain, and you do that through neuroplasticity and with somebody who's trained. Right. You have to rewire, but as you said, right, that's rewiring your brain in activities, right? New friends, new all this. It's rewiring our brains so it can fire in a way that doesn't cause us to make poor life decisions. So if you're in recovery with 13, 14, or 15 years and you haven't relapsed yet, but you continue to choose a really bad partner, you're on your 7th divorce, okay? You're still doing these unhealthy behaviors, but you're sober. But what I tell them is, well, you haven't rewired your brain yet. And you really need to rewire your brain in order so that you can make better life choices. You can choose a better partner in your life.
Mm-hmm. Love it. Where can people find you? How can they find you?
Super easy. I'm all over social media. I know social media is like the devil these days, but it's mostly work. It's the Brandon Lee on Instagram. I'm on Instagram all the time, and Facebook I'm on as well. But you can just check me out online. Just check in the Brandon Lee, artofoursoul.com. Just do a Google search of me. Unfortunately, you will read a lot about me because of the career that I've had. So the good, the bad, the ugly, it all lives online.
Great. Now, what if someone wants to be part of Art of Your Soul? If they want to get involved and they want to do therapy at Art of Your Soul, how can they do that?
They can't. I'm not. I know. I'm just not open to the public yet. And I only partner with treatment centers and organizations that deal with people with trauma. So that's the only way I'm open right now. I'm thinking about expanding at some point, because here's the thing. I want people who have experienced trauma in their life to have access to it. I just haven't figured that part out yet. So unfortunately, I'm not open to the public. I'm only open to private treatment centers and organizations. So
So the way that they can partake in Art of Your Soul is
you can go to IOP. You can go to IOP
over IOP at one of the treatment centers. So it would be one of the therapies. So Camelback Recovery, we are partnering with Art of Our Soul. So if
part of that program will be coming over,
then you get to partake in.
Come hang out with me once a week, and we do acrylic pouring as part of your clinical program at Camelback Recovery. So that's the way it works. It's crazy. Here's the crazy thing. I've actually had people graduate, from their PHP or IOP program, and I've seen them for a few months. Yeah. And this one girl looked at me and she goes, "But I want to keep coming back." And I'm like, "Gosh, I'm so sorry. I'm trying to work on an alumni class that'll be funded, so alumni can come." And then, she looked at me, Tim, and she goes, "Well, wait a second." She goes, "But if I relapse and I go back into treatment, I can come back." And I was like, "Holy shit. No. No. Don't relapse just to come back and do art." Come back and do art. But that's the best way to do it is to if you are needing recovery or an IOP program, I always say meet people where they're at. So some people aren't ready for residential treatment. And so IOP is a great way to introduce yourself to a new way of living, right? You can do IOP. You can sleep in your own bed at night. If you're still living at home and your excuse is, well, I've got kids or I have this, well, we can meet you where you're at and check out Camelback Recovery, go into their IOP program and see maybe that's kind of a toe into the door to the new journey. And you can do it that way.
Awesome. Brandon, I really enjoyed getting to know more about you. I really enjoyed this conversation. Thanks so much for your time.
Yeah, same, Tim. Congratulations on your podcast too, and continue to recover out loud, as we say.
Awesome.